and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 5 of Neon Genesis Evangelion. If you'd like to watch along, start watching now. So, last we left off, it seems like Shinji had come to terms with Kensuke and Toji and they're sort of tentatively friends. But rather than picking up with that, we're sort of starting off with this, test sequence of Unit 0. And I believe we had already seen a small snippet of Unit 0 before, and it was sort of, in a poor state. So I guess it seems to me that if this is after that, then they've clearly repaired it, but if not, this might be some sort of failed test. I spoke too soon. I think it's pretty clear at this point that this is a failed test. Something's clearly not right here with the Evangelion. And I guess it's sort of pulling Unit 1 where it just sort of goes berserk. So berserk, in fact, that it's able to rip its restraints right out of the wall. So, I'm not exactly sure what Unit 0 has in mind here, but it's clearly punching at Gendo. And whether that's because it has some beef with him or not is unclear, or if maybe it was just sort of punching at the only thing in an otherwise featureless white room. I guess what's starting to become clear is that Gendo... This is the first time we've really seen him show any kind of emotion, and it's concern for Rei. And I guess it's pretty notable because he's grabbing onto this piece of metal that's burning his hands in an attempt to get Rei out of the entry plug. There's really not a whole lot we know about Rei at this point, but this sort of scene right here with Gendo showing compassion to her really is at odds with that whole thing about how, Shinji, if you don't get in the robot, Rei's going to have to do it again despite being cripplingly injured. I guess that sort of hints at the greater moral complexity of Evangelion, because while Gendo truly does seem to care for Rei outwardly, if Rei truly was the only person who could do it, even in her state, for the fate of humanity, I guess it would be something that would have to be done. So interestingly enough, there's a nice little scene here of, I guess, Nerve checking out the corpse of the fourth angel. To my understanding, that's not something you generally see. In a lot of like giant robot anime, they normally like beat the thing and that's the end of it. Granted, my knowledge is far from perfect, but I can't think of any other anime that's done that sort of thing. Alright, so they're talking about the angel's waveform, so to speak. And interestingly, there is a little snippet there of a bunch of letters. And those letters are indicators of the chemicals that make up human DNA. And indeed, Ritsuko herself says that the angel is like 99.9% similar to humans, genetically speaking. So I think that's a little bit of a hint there that something much bigger is going on behind the scenes. So even Shinji sounds incredulous about the story about how Gendo burned his hands. And from Shinji's perspective, it's easy to see why he wouldn't believe it, given all he knows about his father and what we've seen of their two interactions together, or the interactions between the two of them together. So Shinji hasn't learned his lesson about not being evasive. And he's drawing the, I guess, the intrusion from his classmates. So interestingly, Rei, who's sort of been an unknown quantity, continues to be so. Because even Kensuke and Toji don't really know a whole lot about her. And apparently she's been around for quite a few years at this point. So Shinji's sort of privy to a little conversation here between Gendo and Rei. I don't think he can hear what they're saying, but he can sort of see how they're interacting. And Gendo reacts to her a lot more warmly than he does to Shinji. So Misato and Shinji have invited Ritsuko over, and it's become pretty clear, to Ritsuko at least, that her friend is still living like a college student. Personally, I was never really big on instant ramen. There are times when I did resort to it, but, thankfully those days are behind me, by and large. So just as he was sort of like really thinking about her, Shinji now has the opportunity to interact with Rei directly, thanks to Ritsuko. The Ritsuko's comments are kind of interesting because it sort of sets up Rei as being inhuman. And I guess given what we know about her right now, she is kind of inhuman because she's the only character with the bizarre hair color. Everyone else has been fairly normal so far. So Shinji's arrived at her apartment and it looks pretty derelict. There's a bunch of mail stuffed in the mail slot, bunch of junk on the floor. I guess Shinji's trying to be as polite as possible, but you can really only go so far, I guess. The rest of her apartment is either super sparse or messy. There are things like bloody bandages all over the place, strewn about fairly haphazardly. There's also a fair bit of medication on one of the tables, indicating that Rei probably has some sort of condition that requires constant medication. So, in classic anime fashion, Shinji has stumbled upon a very difficult situation. I guess the strangest part about this entire scene is that Rei doesn't really react to anything. Her first instinct is to take the glasses that Shinji was wearing away from him. She's incredibly nonchalant about what should be an extremely uncomfortable situation. And Shinji, although he's usually awkward, like, at least in this situation, it's kind of understandable. So even as Shinji explains this whole situation, Rei just sort of ignores him, gets dressed, and just doesn't say anything. And then she just leaves without acknowledging him at all, or even taking the card he came to deliver. You know, a lot of that you could probably just chalk up to it being anime, but, you know, when you think about it, if an actual person behaved like that, it would be really unsettling. She's almost like an automaton the way she acts. Like she doesn't make any conversation at all. Like the few times she does bother to respond to anything, it's like a one-word sentence. So Ray finally shows some personality here. Shinji sort of snaps about his dad and she smacks him for it. Now granted, that's probably a pretty inhuman reaction to something like this. But I guess given what we currently know about these two characters, it sort of makes sense. So for the first time, I guess since the incident, they're firing Unit Zero back up and Ray's gonna pilot it. At least this time it seems to be going better than the previous test. Alright, so unlike the last test, they managed to go beyond that critical borderline, whatever it was. So it seems like the test finally was a success. So rather than just having to rely on Shinji, NERV has two EVA pilots at its disposal. Of course, this test was interrupted by what is very likely the fifth angel. So here we have that iconic angel that everybody probably knows about, the big flying octahedron. This is one of the things I really like about Evangelion. All the angels are super otherworldly and mysterious, and some of them are pretty darn creepy, but I think for all of them, the fifth angel, I think, is probably the coolest. So it seems like the fifth angel is a bit better prepared than former angels, because as soon as Unit 1 pops up, it blasts it with a big laser beam. It's not clear whether this will prove fatal for Shinji or the Eva, but it's definitely not a good start. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one.